Adding gels to your genre of photography is a wonderful way to introduce color to the images that you capture. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined, and in this series, we're going to take a look at the basics of gelled photography and transform this straight out of camera image into this final piece of artwork using Photoshop. To get started on the journey of a basic look at gelled photography, we're going to work with an image that is the image we'll use throughout the series. And today we'll talk about the photography, the lighting equipment, the elements that were used, some color theories, and so forth. Then we'll take that image into Adobe Camera Raw and prepare it as a foundation for Photoshop. And then in the other videos, we're going to go through frequency separation, dodging and burning, and artistic enhancement to create the final piece of artwork. But before we dive into all of that, I do want to take a brief minute to mention a business that I partner with, which is Intuition Backgrounds. They design backgrounds for photography, and it covers a wide genre of photography like newborns or children, maternity, all the way through to gelled photography, conceptual work, beauty work, everything. And they have beautiful, beautiful backdrops, beautiful designs. The materials that they use are amazing, and they're just a great group of individuals. They're some of the best people that I know, and I am so excited to work with them because they have given me an opportunity to design some backdrops for them. And I think that's the coolest thing in the world, to use my artistic vision and to know that what I produce could be used as a backdrop for another artist to create art against. It's a great opportunity, and I'm so excited to work with them. Some of the other designs that they have in their backdrops have been designed by some of the most prominent folks in our industry. So please visit their website. It's intuitionbackgrounds.com, or you can go to their Facebook page to find out more information about them. And at the time of this recording of this video, they have a sale going on, a garage sale, so to speak, that goes on till March 31st, 2020, where they have varying items and so forth on sale. So visit their website to find out more about that. Now, if you're finding this video after that sale date, still go to their website, because you can sign up to get information about future promotions that they'll have or new additions to the lineups that they have. So please visit them and check them out. They're a great company, great backdrops. You will not be disappointed. So let's dive in and take a look at the image that we're going to be working on today in Adobe Bridge, and we'll start getting into this discussion about gel photography. So first and foremost, this is our model, Savannah. Everybody say hi to Savannah. Hi, Savannah. And you can see all of her work by following her Instagram link at the bottom of the screen. She's a truly creative individual, and I had a blast working with her. This image is straight out of camera. No alterations or changes have been made. This is exactly what we see on set. And the first thing that I want to talk about is what is gel photography. And gel photography really is just taking a colorful gel and putting in front of a light. And it can be one light as an accent that's a kicker onto the subject or onto the background, or all the lights can have gels within them. And you can tell the entire story of the image through the gels. Telling images and stories with color, all the lights being filled with color, it's so much fun to do, because the images are just vastly different when the gels are in front of the lights instead of without them. And I really do love using them. I've been using gels for a long time, actually, but I used to use them with high school senior portraits, but I use them as accents or just little kickers in the background. I never really put the gels on all of the lights until about 2 years ago. And when I did, it was such a fascinating, beautiful view of an image that I just instantly was hooked. And I've been working with them ever since and adapting and learning as I go. So let's talk about the lighting pattern now, because I think that's where most folks get stuck when they start thinking about gels. They get stuck with, well, I don't know how do you set up the lights, and what are the power of the lights, and what modifiers? There must be some crazy magic that has to be involved to produce all this. And that's not true. The lighting patterns are identical to the same lighting patterns you would use in standard studio portraiture or in a lighting controlled environment. All you're doing is putting a gel in front of the light. So whatever your favorite lighting patterns are, start there. Put some gels in front of the lights and see what's produced. So this is a lighting diagram, so to speak, of this image that you see on the screen. And imagine you're in the studio, above, looking straight down, being a peeping Tom during my photo shoot, and all this should make sense. So first and foremost, we're using gray seamless paper as a backdrop. Now, it doesn't look gray in the picture, and I'll explain why here in just a moment. But we're using 4 lights, 4 Godox AD600 strobes. The two here on either side, they have matching 12-inch by 55-inch strips, and the strips have a grid inside of them. The grid really controls the light and controls the throw of the light, so it'll fall onto the subject. Is it key or necessary to have a grid to do gels? No, you don't have to have them. But if you do have them, I recommend using them because it will let you just focus the light and really control where it's going. So again, matching light modifiers, the strip boxes with matching gel material. It's the same color. It's the same pieces. And then we have a Godox 8600 above the model with a 33-inch beauty dish, and that has the blue gel on it. The fourth light is behind me with a 47-inch Octabox, the biggest modifier on set, with no gel material in it. But the power of the light has been brought down so much that this light is just a little bit of a gentle fill, and I'll explain why here in just a moment. But one of the things that I want to call out is that this beauty dish, for the diagram, I put the little blue circle behind the model. This is the model, by the way. Hi, model. And I put this behind her, but really in the shot, about 20% of this beauty dish is directly over the model, so that it will feather the light down in front of her just a little bit, and 80% of it is falling behind her. Why? Well, if we look at the image, this blue light is feathering her face here, just little gentle accents of it, and because it has the grid, it's really controlling where it's going to come down into the scene. I wanted that purposefully, the blue to be little accents onto her face, onto her shoulder, and on her forearms and so forth, because with 80% of it falling behind her, it turned the gray paper blue. Blue is my favorite color. So I wanted the foundation of this to be blue, and I wanted the magenta to be the accent colors into the scene. So that's why it's set up that way. Now with the white light behind me, the Octabox behind me, throwing all that white light into the scene, because it's a low power setting, it does two things. First, it starts filling in some of the shadows in here. Without them, it would have been a little bit darker under her jawline, because again, a light is coming from above and from the sides, not directly in front of her. So these areas from the protruding parts of her body are going to have shadows underneath. Number two, with the white light being introduced to these colors, it's giving it a gentle wash of white, which is toning some of it down just a little bit. Why would I want to tone down color if the whole point is to use color to tell the scene or to tell the story of the scene? Because when I bring it down just a little bit, I can use Photoshop to selectively pull in colors and make some of them brighter. When the whole thing is just told all with gels and there's no white light into the scene, it's a very visual, interesting dynamic. It looks beautiful, and I encourage you to try it. But it's sometimes hard to start bringing selective colors that you want to work with into the shot. To talk about the selective colors and to accentuate this point, let's take a look at the color wheel. And we can kind of get to where I'm going with this. So I'm using blue and magenta. And this is why I love this diagram of the color wheel, because magenta here in this is like one little strip. Whereas blue, arguably, we can say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the deep blues, mid blues, and then like the sky blue. But we have one strip that's magenta, because this is like a red maroon. This is a light purple. This is the magenta. Magenta is difficult to find and control in Photoshop. Let me take that back. Magenta is hard to control because it is so close to other colors that we visually recognize as maroon or as light purple. Now, there are companies that make magenta gels, and the gel material, you look at it and you're like, yep, that's magenta, straight up, looks like magenta. But when it's put onto a light, depending upon the power of the light, the size of the modifier, what the model is wearing, and other factors, it may come through looking like light pink or light purple and not magenta. But there's another factor here. When the blue falls and starts interacting with magenta, it starts producing purple, because blue and magenta and purples are right next to each other in the color wheel. When you use a blue gel, usually the other popular color that is used is orange, because it's opposite of blue on the color wheel. And as it interacts with it, it can make it look a little yellow potentially or whatever, but it's not really. It's straight up orange and straight up blue, because they're not mixing with one another. Whereas blue, when it starts mixing with the magenta, you start producing a little bit of that purple. And that was the goal. I didn't want just pure magenta. I wanted magenta and a little bit of purple and a little bit of deep blue and then a little bit of the lighter blue. That's why I use the white light to start trying to wash out just a little bit, so that some of those purples and some of those lighter blues and deeper blues could be put into the scene using Photoshop. Now, I didn't use white lights always. I was just using all gels all the time. And one of my Patreon subscribers and a friend of mine kept pushing me and saying, why don't you use a white light? I don't like it when you just use all the gels. And I was like, well, screw you, it's my photography. But then one day I started using the white light into the scene, and I was like, oh my gosh, it gives a white wash to it and does this and does that, and that's great. Then I can start adding selective colors, and it was magic. So the key here is try new things. I challenge you to not only use gels as an accent, use them to tell the entire story with color, and then bring a white light back into the scene and see what happens. And start creating with your favorite colors and your favorite lighting patterns, and you'll make some interesting artwork itself. So again, the 4 Godox 8600s, a 33-inch beauty dish, 12 by 55 strip boxes with the 47-inch octabox. I'm using a Canon R with a Canon 24-70 2.8 lens, and I was shooting at f11 ISO 401 1/60th of a second for the shutter speed. And with all of those elements combined, we get this image where we can see the base foundations of color. We can see where the blue is being feathered in, and where potentially it's going to start mixing to create purple, magentas, blues, very light blues, deep blues, and some other areas, and so forth. The final thing I want to mention before we take the image into Adobe Camera Raw is that the model is wearing some oil on her skin in selective areas, like here on her sockets of her arms, on her nose, cheekbones, her chin, forearms, and so forth. Using oil or highlighter or Crisco or whatever you want to use, but when that surface is on the skin and the light hits it, it creates a specular highlight that bounces off, and it gives you those really hot spots of color. And I really dig that because it gives the image a potential like chrome metallic feel, and I like that visual style. You don't have to use oils or Crisco or whatever you want to use. You can just do it straight up as it is, and that's fine too. And using some dodging and burning and some other techniques in Photoshop, you can really sculpt the image and make something pretty. I just like using the oils because, again, I like that metallic chrome sheen to the image. So let's take this image into Adobe Camera Raw and get to work, essentially. So I'm using Photoshop CC 2020. It's a part of the Creative Cloud program where you get access to Photoshop, Lightroom, and Bridge for $10 a month. I am not sponsored by Adobe. I'm just giving you good information because when you have the Creative Cloud program, you get access to all the updates that Adobe pushes out instead of buying a standalone version of the program every few years. So check out the Creative Cloud. I do think it's a very good thing to use. Now, if you have seen other videos on this channel, you're probably going to hear me talk about some stuff I already talked about, especially when it comes to Adobe Camera Raw. Or if you've been to conferences that I've taught at or read some of the magazine articles that I've written for Shutter Magazine, I've already went over some of these things. But if you're new to the channel, this is for you. So first and foremost, I use Adobe Camera Raw as Adobe Camera Raw. I do not use it as that other program called Lightroom. I know how to use Lightroom, and I have nothing against Lightroom. I've just been using Photoshop forever. And I only used Lightroom to like batch correct a whole bunch of photos for a wedding. We used to shoot weddings for a number of years. But anyway, the point is, when I work with a file inside of Adobe Camera Raw, I am not working to make the picture pretty right here by just using these sliders that you see on the screen and going, I'm going to take it from a flat image to perfection by using Adobe Camera Raw. I don't do that. What I do is prepare it as a foundation for Photoshop. Why? Because Photoshop enables the opportunity to selectively work on parts of the image. Yes, you can do that here in Adobe Camera Raw by using adjustment brushes, or the same thing in the develop module of Lightroom. But in Photoshop, you have access to layers. Layers are powerful tools that allow you to creatively and selectively enhance your image and work on your image. So I use Adobe Camera Raw just to prepare the image as a neutral foundation for Photoshop, not to artistically enhance the photo itself. First thing I want you to pay attention to is down here, this little white line. If you click it, it'll bring up the workflow options. The two most important things here is color space and bits per channel. This is the color depth of the image. I use Adobe RGB. That's the most popular color space, as well as sRGB are the two most popular color spaces. Some print labs will use different color spaces. Just call them and check out with them to find out what they use. I use Adobe RGB, but here, Photoshop will default to 8 bits per channel. Change it to 16 bits per channel. The analogy of this is this. 16 bits per channel allows Photoshop to have access to like 5 million colors, whereas 8 bits per channel allows Photoshop to have access to like 1 million colors. It's like 8 bits per channel is like having a chocolate chip cookie with like one chocolate chip in the cookie, whereas 16 bits per channel is like having hundreds of beautiful little chocolate chips inside of your cookie. And I'm not going to use the cookie analogy anymore because now I really want cookies. So anyway, change it to 16 bits. The only consequence of 16 bits is that you're going to gain weight by eating a whole bunch of chocolate chips. No, the consequence is your file size is going to get larger. And some of the legacy filters like Crackle and Linen and Mosaic or whatever, you can't use those on 16-bit. They only work with 8-bit. But if for some reason you need to use those filters, you can always convert your image back to 8-bit, run the filter, and then switch it back to 16-bit. So switch it to 16 bits and then hit OK. And that'll be the last time that you have to do that in Adobe Camera Raw, because if you have the Creative Cloud, when you update Photoshop, it will take all your preferences from the previous version into the new version. So what do we do in Adobe Camera Raw? I'm going to give you something that I've talked about again in conferences and other videos and so forth. This is my philosophy of how to start working with an image in Adobe Camera Raw, and it's also a philosophy of what to do with an image throughout various stages of digital enhancement to digital files. Color, luminosity, and detail. Those three elements combined make your image. So when you're looking at an image, especially working with a raw file, you think, what do I do? Well, start with something from either color, luminosity, and detail. Now, since this is gelled photography, you would think we would start with color, but I want to start with luminosity because the image is a little dark. It's not underexposed to the point that it's like, oh, this is way underexposed. I try to photograph the images, especially with gel photography, a little bit darker than I normally would. I used to shoot at f8, ISO 400, 1/160th of a second. I switched to f11 because I love the quality of the shadows. And with gel photography, because the lighting is a little bit lower, it doesn't wash out the color. When the gels are too bright, it's hard to see the color. So making everything a little bit darker gives you the ability to accentuate the color and the light inside of Photoshop. So when I say luminosity, the first thing that I don't want you to think of is, well, luminosity. He wants to make the image brighter. Let's go to exposure and slide it up. I don't want to do that because exposure does everything globally. It's enhancing the entire image globally and making everything brighter. Did it make it brighter? Of course it did, but it did it globally. I want to do it selectively. I want certain areas to be brighter than others. So the first thing that I want to do is to not use exposure. What I want to do is to come to the shadows and start pulling the shadows out of the image so that the details start to come through. And you know what? Let's do a before and after view in Adobe Camera Raw so that we can see what we're doing as we work. So I'm going to zoom in on the right. Well, you'll see the changes, and on the left is the way it was when we first opened it. So I'm going to start pulling out the shadows. And again, the shadow detail in her neck and so forth, we're starting to see some of those details pop out in that area. Just a side note, when I work with a slider inside of Photoshop, I don't grab the slider and I don't go back and forth like this and go like, it was 0. Now I'm going to take it to 100. Oh, that looks great. And let's go. Subtlety is key inside of Photoshop. I'm going to say that again because I say this all the time. Subtlety is key inside of Photoshop. Every step of the way, subtlety is key. Do little changes. Little pictures make a larger world. Little changes to your work, and as you build all those up, you have a beautiful piece. So I don't want to take it all the way out. I want to move the slider back and forth, and I sit here and I do this. I bounce it back and forth because I'm looking at her hair next to her jawline, and I'm like, yeah, I like it right about there. And it's plus 48. I didn't go, I must be somewhere around 25, 48. I don't go numbers driven. I go visually and see what looks good. So we pulled the shadows out a little bit. The next thing that I want to do, again, from a luminosity perspective, is to pull the black point out in the image. The white and black sliders here, they're not actually adding more white or more black to the image. They're reevaluating all the data based upon a new black point and a new white point in the photo. Does it have a byproduct of making the image look brighter? Yes, it does. So I'm going to take the black slider and reevaluate the data based upon a new black point. And I'm pulling out the black point, so to speak, in the image. And it's potentially making the image look a little bit flatter, less contrast in the image. That's okay. We can add contrast back in selectively in certain areas where we need it. But I wanted to pull the black point out just a little bit. Now I'm going to adjust the white point. And this is key in processing a file in Adobe Camera Raw with gel photography. look at the areas that we talked about where she put the Crisco onto her face, where we're going to see these specular highlights. Here below her eyes, the tip of her nose, her chin, and so forth. As I start increasing this white point, we're getting that chromatic metallic feel. And I love that look. And it's simply Photoshop increasing the white point in the image and letting all the rest of the data be reevaluated. So I made those areas brighter, and I never touched highlights, which would increase the highlights in the image, or exposure. So instantaneously with these three, I've been able to pull out some of the darkness in the image and increase the overall white point, the bright point, if you will, into the image. And we're starting to get closer to the foundation that we want to take into Photoshop to work with. So those three sliders look good. I'm not gonna really adjust the highlights too much because the highlights will go too far too quickly if you have increased the white point in the image significantly, which we have. So I can take the highlights up, and if that looks good to you, that's totally fine. Let me stress right now, what I think looks good does not mean you have to think it looks good. Trust your instincts, trust your artistic instincts, and go with them. So in this case, I think this looks too hot with the highlights being pushed up too much. So I'm gonna give them just a little bit of a touch, but I think that's fine there. So shadows, black point have been adjusted, white points have been adjusted for the luminosity values. I think I'm good there. I want to move on to color. And again, color at the bottom of this basic tab inside of Adobe Camera Raw. We have control over vibrance and saturation here. I can increase the vibrance and saturation, but it's doing everything globally. I want to potentially call attention to not only selective colors within this, but potentially change their hue values as well. I can't do that if I just increase everything globally. So I'm going to bring the vibrance back down. I do want to give it just a little bit of a touch, and I try to always match the saturation to whatever number I pick for vibrance, but since I can't get it to land on 6, I'm going to hit 6 on my keyboard and hit enter, so they're there. So we're giving just a little push of vibrance and saturation. To increase the colors in this scene, what I want to do is go to my favorite tab in Adobe Camera Raw, which is Hue, Saturation, and Luminance tabs. This simply gives you control over the hue, the saturation, and the luminance of all the colors. And the reason why I love this tab is because it gives you control over the color orange. In Photoshop, hue, saturation, adjustment layers, color balance, selective color, all these different adjustment layers, they give you access to red and yellow. You have to change dials and ranges to get into orange. Every human being on Earth, regardless of your ethnicity, has orange in your skin tone. In their skin tone. So here under the Hue, Saturation, Luminance tab, I have control over the color orange, and that's key. So I can now, again, speaking from color, start saturating the various colors that we see. Now, I'm not going to saturate orange because even though she's a human being from the planet Earth, I think the orange in her skin tone, we're not going to see because it's being completely covered with the gels. So in this case, I can come to magenta and increase it, but here's the funny thing, there isn't any magenta in the scene. Sometimes magenta is hard to work with, and sometimes it's hard for Photoshop to see it. So it really truly isn't magenta that it's perceiving, it's purple. So as we start increasing the purple saturation point, I'm just increasing purple, not the blues and everything else. If I would have done just saturation on the basic tab, it would have done it globally. This is why I think working selectively is very important. So I can take the purple and increase that, because remember I said I wanted purple and magenta to be the accents of color into this scene. So I can take those up as significantly as I want, and then I can start increasing the blue saturation and bring it up a little bit and start getting a little bit more crispness and richness to that blue. And I actually think that looks pretty good. Let's bring the purple back down just a tad. Now I can come to the Hue tab under Hue, Saturation, Luminance in Adobe Camera Raw, and come down to where it says purple. As you can see, I can start shifting it back toward blue or more toward the reds, magentas, and it's in the middle right now. So this is where I can start playing with it to introduce that little hint of magenta. And again, it's shifting those colors, but as it interacts with blue, there are subtle tones of purple that are in there. But I am not artistically enhancing this photo right now in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm preparing a foundation. During frequency separation, that's where we can start adding purple into the scene and augment where the base is already at. So again, I just am looking at getting that foundation of color, luminosity, and detail put into this photo to then take it into the Photoshops. So at this point, I've changed the hue just a little bit of purple. I'm gonna bring it back just a tad, right about there, I think. And again, the saturation points, we've pushed those up. And look at the variance here. The blue has been pushed up to plus 24 and the purple has been pushed up to plus 37. This is working selectively, not globally by coming to the basic tab and grabbing saturation and yanking it up. So I'm gonna hit Control and minus or Command and minus on the keyboard to zoom out just a little bit. And those subtle little changes right there, look at the vast difference of what we've done preparing this foundation. Again, I shot it a little bit darker. I tend to do that, especially when it comes to general photography, and this is what we're able to do. It is easier to add light to an image in Photoshop than it is to take light away from an image in Photoshop. We've certainly added a lot of light or vibrance or brightness to this photo itself, and I think things look good. Color, luminosity, and detail, we could enhance the texture of this image and the clarity. We can sharpen it here and so forth. I prefer to do the texture work at the end of the process during the artistic enhancement of this. If the details were too soft in the part of preparing the file to get into Photoshop, then of course I could enhance either, again, sharpening or the texture sliders and so forth. But we have a good base here. We're going to use frequency separation to get rid of some blemishes and to really artistically work with the image. So at this point, I think the file looks good and I think it's ready to go into Photoshop. So I'm going to hit Open Image and it'll pull us into Photoshop, where we can now step in to the next video of this series covering the basics of gel photography, where we'll explore frequency separation. So thank you for watching this video. If you like the content of it, please give the video a like, because it feeds the YouTube algorithm and tells the algorithm that this channel has merit and has information that is good and proper for the world out there for the education for photography. And if you like the videos and content that I am pushing out in education, then please consider subscribing to the channel, because it will give you updates as to when new content is coming out. YouTube, I started this channel last year, and I went into Patreon for a little while and explored there. I have wonderful subscribers on Patreon, but I am redirecting my efforts of education back to YouTube, simply so that I can start partnering with other companies and they can see the reach that I have, and I have the opportunity to reach so many more people through the platform of YouTube. So help this channel grow by liking the video, subscribe to the content, and until next time, in the next video, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.